Alrighty, so as I did for the Showa and Heisei series, I'm now going to rank the Millennium series of Godzilla films, and I'll also be including the anime films as well as Shin Godzilla in this ranking. Now I know they aren't technically a part of the Millennium series, but lumping them in here seems more appropriate than lumping them in with the American productions later on. And remember, this is just my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below with your own ranking or top 3 of the Millennium films. So with that said, let's go from worst to first and rank these bad boys up. And as always, there will be some spoilers ahead probably, so you've been warned. And the last place spot is going to probably anger a lot of fans because almost every Godzilla fan I've talked to seems to love this movie, but for me it just doesn't quite come together. So coming in at number 8 is going to be Godzilla Final Wars. Now, while I appreciate how this film doesn't shy away from the nods to previous entries, almost everything else just doesn't really work for me. From the inspiration it takes from the Matrix and the X-Men films, to the jumbled pacing and lack of heft, to the Godzilla battles. With the other entries in the series when Godzilla fights, and I mean you really feel the tension, but here it just seems like there's monster fights for the sake of monster fights, and each fight scene seems insignificant, only there for fan service. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, I just need a little more meat on the bones for my Godzilla films. Okay, so where Final Wars lacked meat, my number 7 entry is dripping with meat, but through odd pacing and an overly convoluted premise, this one just doesn't quite have the spark I was hoping for. So coming in at number 7 is the Godzilla Anime Trilogy. While the films vary in quality, I think I can comfortably put them together in this number 7 spot because they all kind of just feel like one TV show. Now I appreciate that they tried something different and out there for Godzilla's first official animated entry, I just think it was so worried about seeming smart that it forgot to make the movies entertaining. Of course the series isn't all bad, the way it tackled the twin fairies was nice and the idea of a Godzilla-run planet is interesting, and Godzilla himself looked amazing, especially Scarlet Godzilla. I just feel like it lacked the action elements that make up the best kaiju films. Even the final fight with Ghidorah was about a man fighting his inner demons more than a monster battle. But one thing I can say about this series is it's definitely the most memorable and different compared to the more regular Godzilla films. And coming in at number 6 is going to be the second Millennium film, Godzilla vs. Megaris. So now we're getting back to the more traditional Godzilla films. This time he's a somewhat anti-hero who reluctantly takes on the flying Megaris, however you want to say it. The humans take a backseat to the monster action, which does allow for some interesting battles between the kaijus, but does lack the heart of the Godzilla 2000, the film that came before this one. It is worth mentioning here that the film isn't a direct sequel to that film, but it actually takes place inside of its own alternative timeline after the Godzilla 1954 film, where the Oxygen Destroyer was never used. But besides that altering of the Godzilla history, this film doesn't really offer anything new to the lore and comes off as a little generic. But all in all, I think it's still somewhat worth watching if you're into kaiju action. So, coming in at number 5 is going to be the only direct sequel to another film in this series, Tokyo SOS. This film benefits from the framework created by Godzilla against MechaGodzilla, allowing the action to begin sooner, but does lack some of the human elements that made that entry more enjoyable. But nonetheless, this is a fun entry in the series that adds in Mothra to aid MechaGodzilla against Godzilla. Now, not too much else to say about this one, it's more or less just builds on the previous film's groundwork, but makes the human characters a little more one note. I'd say it's still worth watching, and if you watch Godzilla against MechaGodzilla, you should definitely finish it up with this one. And speaking of that film's groundwork, coming at number 4 is Godzilla against MechaGodzilla. I think this film has some of the best kaiju action seen on screen, especially during the Millennium series. The fight scenes between MechaGodzilla and the Big G feel real and have some of the best special effects to the date in the series. The human element is also much stronger this time around, allowing us to care more for the action scenes surrounding them and giving us more to root for. The only thing that this film lacks is a strong conclusion, as it was building up this whole movie to defeat Godzilla, but they more or less just heavily damage him and he just saunters back into the ocean. But the film doesn't suffer too much from the lackluster conclusion, and I think you'll get a good dose of kaiju fun from it. And coming into the top 3 we have Godzilla 2000. The first film of the Millennium series is one of its strongest. After the American 1998 Godzilla, Toho wanted to establish the character in Japan again. I think for the most part they succeeded. The weird CGI in the UFO ship is a little distracting, but once Godzilla's opponent evolves in the Orga, the movie really picks up. I also really like the redesign of Godzilla. While I may prefer the Heisei era design, I'm glad they weren't afraid to radically introduce something new for a new generation. Now the human elements are a little lacking and probably more on par with Tokyo SOS, but I think the originality of this entry's kaiju helps to place it comfortably at number 3. Now coming into the number 2 spot is the film with the best name in the entire series, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. This is possibly the only entry in the series that frames Godzilla as a pure evil creature instead of his typical anti-hero or force of nature. and with that we get a change of shift here. The film is darker and devoid of some of the humor of these series, and also for the first time I believe King Ghidorah gets framed as a good guy, and despite some glaringly poor CGI in moments, this film manages to have some of the best Godzilla destruction in the series, only second to my next entry on this list. And coming in the number 1 spot is a film that helped to breathe new life into the series, and that film of course is the amazing Shin Godzilla. The ever-evolving Godzilla in this film is right up my alley and allows to frame Godzilla in a new light. The correlation between real-life disasters and destruction that Godzilla causes is a nice touch and helps to ground the film. The CGI is absolutely amazing. They purposely made Godzilla move slowly like a man in a heavy rubber costume to make it feel as real as he does in the earlier entries, while allowing them to get creative with both his abilities and designs. Now the human part of the movie seems to be the most controversial part of the film, largely because it takes place in a lot of boardrooms and meeting rooms without them truly getting involved in the action on the streets, but as far as I'm concerned this is a perspective that's often overlooked in these films, and shining a light on it allows them to show the effects a large disaster has on a government system. I also feel like the human characters, while a little clinical in their approach, are allowed to seem more human, which helps me to relate to the movie a bit better. So in all, this is one of the best Godzilla films I've ever seen, and I'm really hoping we can one day get a sequel of some sort to it at least. So what did you guys think of my rankings? Do you agree or do you have your own opinions about the franchise? Feel free to leave your thoughts down below, and before I sign off I want to thank Colton Wood and Karen DeMarsh for supporting the Patreon as well as all my other supporters. Thank you for checking out the channel and subscribe for more speed arts in the future. And until next time, don't forget to keep on keeping on!